Okay guys, today we're going to be rebuilding the single barrel carburetor off 79 Ford F350 with a 306 cylinder in it. So we're going to take it apart. We've got a kit here and a new fuel pump to put on it. We'll show that in another video.
Like this kind of stuff?
There's always 14 or 15 cats around here to help out, so hopefully they don't like stealing carburetor parts. So this carburetor's been rebuilt once before. Already got an auto line tag on it. Customer complaint was it was flooding all the time, so probably an issue with the float or the needle and seat. This carburetor is very clean inside for, I'm not sure how long the truck sat, but at least a year.
Holy.
What's that?
He picked up 3 subscribers already.
You can join the camera.
It's messing on that back there. What are you doing?
She clipped the mic on.
That's what I said, but he thinks that's cheesy.
No, I don't think so. A little better quality.
He's talking pretty loud.
We just undid that rod there for the accelerator pump, so we can take that lever out, and then we can take the pump out. There's a little hose in there that connects the pump to the jet, so we'll pull that hose off next. And there's your accelerator pump. Jets. When you take out your mixture screw here, I always turn them in, count where they were, and then record that and put it back to the same position after you get it all cleaned up. So 3 3/4 of a turn. And you never want to tighten too much because you'll jam that needle in there and then it'll snap off when you take it out. A little bit of junk in the bottom there. And you want to check the throttle shaft for any play. This one's in pretty good shape. So we'll get everything cleaned up and then we will be back to assemble it.
This is just some other projects that we're working on. This is a 302 high output engine for this 91 Ford. Just another project. This is another project that we picked up, and we're gonna get the engine going and either make it into an enduro race car or put the engine into a 78 Bronco. Oh.
Okay guys, we've got everything cleaned up here. We're gonna start by putting the mixture screw back in before we forget how many turns it was that we took it out. Today we just used some brake and parts cleaner to clean this thing up. It was fairly clean, so didn't have to get too aggressive with a carburetor cleaner. But if you got a good carburetor cleaner around, that's the best way to do it. So that's in and bottomed out. Again, do it by hand. Don't tighten them up too much. And that's 3 3/4 turns out again for that piece. We've got a BWD float and carburetor kit. They are not a sponsor yet, so we'll just compare that to the old one. It's all the same. Probably nothing wrong with these composite floats anyway, but got a new one to put in it. And same thing with the kit here. We'll just get that opened up. So all your instructions for setting the float and the choke and all of that stuff will be in these, so you want to pay close attention to that stuff. And you have a pretty good breakdown of what the carburetor looks like on there, so you can, you know, if you forget how something came apart, you should be able to figure it out. But it's a good idea to take some pictures if you don't do this all the time, and that way you know what's going on when you put it back together. So first thing we're going to do is compare the gaskets, not drop them on the floor. Make sure that when you're replacing the gaskets, you line them all up, make sure the holes match, because sometimes you'll have different gaskets. Like this one here has a different little ear, so we'll make sure there isn't a different one here that'll be the same.
So you don't use all of those? They just come with different ones?
And so this one is different, so that's not the right gasket. This is the same as what came out. Line them up there, all the holes match up. That's what we're going to put back in it. And we'll do the same thing with the body gasket. There's two options for that. We're going to make sure that we have the same one going back in, and the only difference here again is well, quite a big difference actually on the body. A couple holes that are different, so we're going to double check this one here. This is the right one, everything matches up. So again there, that's the one we'll be using, and we'll throw those out when we're done. Get the base gasket, air horn gasket, and that'll be it, I believe, for this one, for gaskets. So, and there's another cat trying its best to help out. And we have the new accelerator pump. Old one actually looked in good shape as well, no holes in it, but we're going to obviously replace that. New little hose to go from the accelerator pump to the jet and the throttle body, so we'll pull that one off and we'll put the new one on there too. When you're cleaning these things up, make sure you blow through all the little ports on everything, especially where the adjustment or the mixture screw goes through. All these little ports that come into the throttle body, they all have to be really clean. New needle and seat, we're going to throw that in next here.
Diane.
So because the float looked like it was in pretty good shape, this is likely where our issue was with the needle and seat not sealing up anymore. We'll have a gasket in there on the old seat, and we will grab the new one out of the kit here. So we've got a few parts to that. Throw the gasket on there. And we'll get that in first. Okay, then we got a little spring. We'll go on this little piece that sits inside the needle there. Slide that all in, spring loaded. Make sure that's nice and free. You can see it moving good there. And drop it in. And then we will throw in the float. And I'll show you guys how to set the float height. In your kit, you're going to get a little L-shaped measuring tool, and in your instructions, it'll show you where to set the float type, or the float here.
Good.
Okay guys, if you can see this, the float settings for this carburetor are 11/16 from the base here to the bottom of this right here. So you measure with your tool, you don't press down on the float, and you'll see that we have it set at 11/16 of an inch in that space. Then you flip it over and you do the same thing. And to get that, to change that first setting, you bend this float arm here. The second setting on these is 1.5 inch drop from the base of the carburetor to that piece right here, this level right here, and that's 1.5 inch setting. So you can see that we've got that set not quite where we want it. So we're going to bend this tab down just a little bit by pulling down here, and what that's bending is this tab right here, and that's the stop for the bottom level. So we'll hold that there again. We're almost there. And there we are, 1.5 inch set nice there. So that's how you set your float, and you can double check it a couple times to make sure you're good to go. An incorrect float setting will also either, if it's set too low for the top, will starve the fuel to the engine, and if it's set too high, it'll also flood the fuel, and it'll actually come out the vent on the top of the carburetor, and it'll be leaking into the throat of the carburetor here and flooding the motor. So you don't want to be doing that either. So now we'll put the accelerator pump, the new accelerator pump in, and get that all set up. Now that just slides through here, and we'll make sure we got that set the right way.
Good.
Okay, so this accelerator pump, when you're putting that together, reference your diagram to make sure you're doing it right, and it shows you where everything lines up there. But if you look here, there's a notch in the gasket and there's a notch in the housing, and those have to line up when you put that together. And that will correspond with a notch inside the base of the carburetor, and you set that in there. And you know what, it'll be a lot easier if we put these screws in first, so that they're in the holes ready to go. Some of the 2-barrel carburetors, when you're putting the accelerator pump in, they'll actually have another gasket that goes along with that, but this one being that it's on the inside of the carburetor doesn't have that, whereas those 2-barrel ones are on the outside. You want to make sure when you're tightening screws in a carburetor, you do everything really evenly and don't over tighten stuff. They're all just aluminum housings, so you don't want to strip out a screw, because then your carburetor is no good. Okay, then we'll put our first spring over top and the first spring retainer. Push the spring down here, see if you can see that, past the slot in the pump. Slide the retainer on, release the spring, that holds it all in place. And now when it pumps, when it pumps, that spring will keep it returning back to where it should be. And we're going to throw this new hose on there. It's a flexible little hose that goes on the accelerator pump to the jet, which is ported to come out here and spray in when you step on the throttle. It'll spray in a little shot of fuel here. That accelerator pump is what keeps the engine from stumbling when you step on the throttle hard. That's a little tight going on, so we're going to do a little trick here. We'll be back in a minute.
Good.
Okay, this hose is a little rigid, so we're just going to warm it up just a bit so it pushes onto the thing nicely there, and it'll seal up good. There, that just slipped right on, no problem. And we'll do the same thing on this end. Okay, so there we've got that little hose on the accelerator pump in there, up to the jet.
Okay, good.
Okay, before we put the rest of the accelerator pump together, we're going to put these jets back in. They're nice and cleaned up. Just need a small screwdriver. Again, make sure everything's clean when you're doing this stuff. That was the first little jet right in there. That's in there tight. And the next one here, I'm going to look through it, blow through it, make sure it's nice and clean, it's all good. We'll take and put that one back in here.
Yes.
Okay guys, so in this carburetor kit here, they're showing a check valve, which is this little ball, and a weight that goes above it, and that is to prevent flow from the accelerator pump when you don't want it. What was in this particular carburetor was different than that. We have just this little weight with a coned seat on it instead, so you always got to watch when you're taking stuff apart to make sure that if you don't have the new replacement, that you have to reuse the old one. And in this case, this didn't come with a kit, but it's in good shape. There's no ridges on the needle, so we're going to stick it back in. And it drops in this hole here, and it's just a little check valve to prevent unwanted fuel flow. So the next thing we're going to throw in is this guy, and make sure that the spring is on there. It's kind of compiled of 3 parts, and there's a setting that will set up after here. So this rod goes in first, this piece goes on top, and then this needle goes in, and that has to line up in there with the jet. We'll get it in there, and we'll get it in where you can see it. Hopefully you can see that, where that needle goes inside that jet down there. So we'll put this spring and retainer back on top of that, and then we'll do the setting. Okay, we got this all in. We'll set that once we have the base on the carburetor. So we'll flip this over, and we'll take our bottom gasket, line that up, take our base for the carburetor, and we'll set that in place. Same thing guys, when you tighten these screws like this, tighten them even, get them all snugged up first, and don't over tighten them. Now we'll get the linkages on for the bottom of the accelerator pump. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is connect this linkage to the accelerator pump, the arm there. So to do that, I'll slide it back into here. It's a little tricky because you got to hold things. So slide this in, and then hopefully you can see this. We'll get down to there. We'll get that rod in to the pump, and you can see that it dropped in place there. And then we're gonna twist that out. And we'll tighten that screw to lock that plate back in place. Okay, so now when we run the pedal, that pump will pump. A little tight when we took it off, so we're just going to give it a little shot of this magic. And it'll keep it moving freely as it needs to. Before we do that, we'll put the snap ring back on. Alright. Then we have the last piece of the puzzle here. Okay, and the last couple little pieces here will stick on the throttle shaft, and then we can put that screw back in that holds that all together. Okay. Now we'll see that everything functions there. This is your fast idle solenoid. And you can see that pump working. So now that we've got this set, we'll adjust the setting on the accelerator pump to make sure it's in spec. Okay guys, to adjust this needle in here on the diaphragm for the accelerator pump, you're supposed to back out the idle screw, which we just realized is missing, so we're going to have to find one of those to put in back after. You want to make sure the throttle stays closed. Back this screw out, push down on the diaphragm till it bottoms out, and then tighten this, and I don't know if you can see, until that screw hits the lifter link. Then start compressing the spring. Once it contacts that lifter link, we want one additional turn. So that's a half and one. And that's the adjustment for that. So now we're going to go find a screw that we can use for a fast idle screw in the tickle trunk. Okay, so we found a screw and a spring and setup in the tickle trunk there in the toolbox that'll work for the idle screw. So that'll help us a lot when we're putting it back on the truck. So everything is back inside here. When we were working on it, this little weight and check valve fell out, so we got that back in. And got the right gasket lined up here. That in place. And the other thing we're going to do on this rod is we're going to put a little bit more of that grease on this rod so this bushing spins nice and free. Okay, we'll get these last screws in here. Same thing when you're tightening these, along with the bowl screws. I'm going to make sure they all snug up evenly and you're not getting. So we got 3 around here. And then these 4. Oh, that's the wrong screwdriver. Around the bowl. And you always want to make sure you leave that tag on the carburetor for the next guy so that he can order the right kit, because when Autoline rebuilds these and ships them out, they take the factory tag off, and that's what you need to order the parts. But you can order the kit by the Autoline tag as well. I wish they'd leave the factory tags on myself. Okay, that's on there, and we just have to put the snap ring back on. And the kit, there is a new one, but it's a different style. Oh no, there's the same. So we're gonna put the new snap ring on that choke pull off shaft there, and these are fun to get at as well. Open the throttle up. Okay, got that snap ring on there now. So that's the single barrel, one lunger, as some guys call them, carburetor. We didn't play with the choke setting. We may have to adjust that once we get it running on the truck, but we'll see once we get that going. Everything else is done up, ready to go. So we'll hopefully get some video of getting it installed and running and setting the timing on the truck if we can swing that, and we'll see you in the next video.